So let me introduce to you our last, but definitely not the least of our speakers, Engineer Bernard R. Punzalan II. He is currently the weather specialist of the Training and Public Information section of the PAGASA Central Office. He's also a licensed agricultural engineer. He finished his BS degree in agricultural engineering in 2001 at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. He also took some units of MS degree on atmospheric science, meteorology, and climate studies at the Ateneo de Manila University in 2010. He also attended various workshops and courses on meteorologist training course, international workshop on climate change and agriculture in Shfayim, Israel, and an international training course on agrometeorology in Nanjing, China. So his professional involvement in other areas include international quality auditor of PAGASA Weather Division and Technical Training Unit. He's also a national validator, Gawad Kalasag, National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council since 2007. He's a regular lecturer, facilitator in the REDAS Trading by PBOX DOST SWIFT module. He stopped as a speaker in various information campaigns and other disaster risk reduction climate change related undertakings within and outside PAGASA. So let us all give a warm welcome to Engineer Bernard R. Punzalan II.
I'll be giving you a lecture. Let me just pull up my slides for you. This will just be about 30 minutes of presentation. I hope you can see already. No? The title of my presentation is Understanding Hydrometeorological Hazards and Weatherproofing Our Offices and Institutions, by yours truly. And notice the word hydrometeorological. No, it's a tongue twister. And actually, it's a union of two words. No, hydro meaning something to do about water, and the meteorology, which has something to do about the weather. So we'll talk about it later. No? For the flow of my presentation, we'll begin with a background and overview, and then go through some of the weather systems, the major weather systems that affects our country and its associated hazards. And then we'll go to an interesting tool which we can use to weatherproof our offices, through severe wind risk assessment. And then finally, some final words and a summary of our discussion. Okay, so just the background. The Philippines is quote-unquote blessed with a lot of weather systems that perennially affect our country year-round. Starting with the monsoons, like the the southwest and the northeast monsoon. Right now, we are experiencing the southwest monsoon, or yun pong habagat. We also experience frontal systems, especially during the bare months. Okay. Also, we are familiar with the ITCZ, and of course, ever popular tropical cyclones, so yung mga bagyo. And then we are also being visited by El Nino and La Nina from time to time, giving us excessive rainfall, floods, mudflow, landslides, strong winds, and storm surges. That's why our country is consistently ranking among the top 3 countries that are most exposed and at risk in terms of natural hazards, from 2018 earlier. So hindi lang po sa sports gold medalist, pati rin po sa mga disasters daw. Medyo nagse-second rank po tayo. And as a matter of fact, last 2014 we ranked second, possibly because of the Bohol earthquake then, and of course Typhoon Yolanda, Super Typhoon Yolanda. But luckily, 2019 until present, we slided down to 9th place, meaning that there's somehow an improvement on the part of disaster risk reduction and management, thanks to our efforts. It's paying off already. So hopefully it continues. We slide down, wala na dun sa top 10. Okay. So all of these brings hydrometeorological hazards, and some of which are strong winds, flooding due to heavy rainfall, mud flow, landslides, storm surges. All of this batter our country and test our coherence, so to speak. We begin with a weather system we call northeast monsoon, or yung hanging amihan in Filipino. No, it's a wind that blows from the northeast. That's why it's named such. And it brings cold air, especially during the last quarter of the months and early 3 months of the year. This is the one that brings rains to a lot of places, especially those lying on the eastern side of the Philippines, okay, those facing the Pacific. Alongside with this northeast monsoon is what we call the cold front. This is the interaction of the warm air that is inherent here in the Philippines as a tropical country. The northeast monsoon interacts with that warm air, creating this cold front. If you will notice the streak of clouds that is being shown on the satellite imagery. The concentration of clouds are mostly on the part of the Philippines, and this also brings rain to our country, especially during those periods of the year, okay, during the last quarter and even the first quarter of the year. Okay, so how clouds are formed, just to give you an idea of cloud formation. This is actually a simple mechanism in meteorology. Every time there's an upward motion of air, whether it's due to this frontal system. This frontal system, by the way, is represented by the cold air on the left side of our screen, and the warm air is being lifted or jacked up as the cold air advances. So this race or the upward motion of the warm air creates clouds, and the clouds thereby brings rain. So that's the upward motion that we usually meteorologists look after, whether the upward motion is due to frontal mechanism like this, or an orographic lift, like during like for example in mountains, face of mountains, or simply an updraft motion due to the heating of the ground. So that's a convective process. So every time there's an upward motion, there's cloud formation, and cloud formation also brings rain. Okay. Now, we all know that in 2006, there's a tragedy that happened in Ginsaugon, southern Leyte. It's a massive landslide. That's because of the excessive rains that were experienced back then due to the northeast monsoon and tail end of a cold front, plus some minor earthquakes that triggered the landslide. So this is very massive, and a lot of damages are experienced in the communities, low-lying communities, and of course casualties. Okay. And of course, our southwest monsoon, as experienced right now as we speak. Okay, this is the wind that blows from the southwest, bringing lots of rains because it carries a lot of moisture from the Indian Ocean, and that wind is actually coming all the way from Australia. So from Australia, it goes up. Goes northward, curving to the Indian Ocean, picks up those lots of moisture, and as it reaches the country, it brings a lot of heavy rainfall here. So this is satellite imagery of the Typhoon Marce circulation that we can notice on top of the Philippines. And as you will notice also, there are a lot of clouds that is being developed on the lower portions or the southern part of the typhoon or the tropical cyclones, and that's the southwest monsoonal wind flow. Okay, and notice also yung clouds are registering on the satellite imagery, the yellow and red colors. No, those represent the clouds that are rain-bearing clouds. And just recently, no, noong July 23, this is Typhoon Fabian up north, and also southwest monsoon is very much evident, bringing lots of rains, especially on the western side of our country, covering the whole of Luzon and the eastern part of Visayas. In Mindanao, not much. Okay. So this is an image of the southwest monsoon or habagat in August 2012. This is the Philippine General Hospital. And as you can see in the background, no, the Makati skyline, and the cloud is very thick. This picture is actually taken at noontime. So just imagine how thick those clouds are, and it brings very huge amounts of rain that floods our streets and communities. So aside from those monsoons, we have the ITZZ, or the Intertropical Convergence Zone. It's the merging of two trade winds from both from north and south, no? And as they do, develops circulations that we identify as tropical cyclones and low pressure areas. And then lastly, the very popular weather system that affects our country is the tropical cyclone. It's a circulation, no? And it brings winds of with speeds of up to 300 kilometers an hour. So for super typhoons especially, and has a diameter of about 300 to about 1,000 kilometers. So this is a part of a tropical cyclone. The one in the middle, especially on mature tropical cyclones, we call severe tropical storms or typhoons. No, that's the eye, no? The center part wherein there's no cloud formation. On the other hand, surrounding that area is what we call the eye wall. This is the area where we experience the most violent rains and wind due to a tropical cyclone. Okay. So this is the tropical cyclone early warning system. We have 3 regions now, aside from the PAR, the Philippine Area of Responsibility. I presume that everyone's familiar with the PAR, no? And surrounding that PAR is an outer region surrounded by the green lines, the TCA region. This is the area wherein if there's a tropical cyclone that develops or enters within this area, we issue advisories for our kababayans, our stakeholders, our countrymen, on a 12-hour basis, usually 11 in the morning and in the evening. Okay. So no worries if the tropical cyclone is just outside of that area, or in other words, within the TCI region, because PAGASA will just be giving you information about the tropical cyclone. It's not yet threatening. So when a tropical cyclone enters the PAR, we usually name it locally. No, this is the first row here is the lineup of names for 2021, and our latest tropical cyclone was Fabian. The next one would be Goryo if there's another TC that enters the PAR in the coming days. Okay, so auxiliary names, just in case this list I've shown earlier, this one, no, we use the auxiliary names after the last name for this 2021 list, no? And if 2021 is not yet finished. Okay. So did you know that tropical cyclone intensity is based solely on wind speed, not on any other meteorological parameters, no? Just for wind speed. And we categorize tropical cyclones into 5, namely tropical depression, tropical storm, severe tropical storm, typhoon, and super typhoon. Back in the earlier days, we used to just use, or we just used to have three categories, namely TD, TS, and typhoon. But in 2015, we added two more categories, and that's the severe tropical storm and the super typhoon. That's why that's why during the typhoon Yolanda, it's not yet categorized as a typhoon. I mean super typhoon. Typhoon pa lang po siya. Okay. So correspondingly, warning signals are based on wind speeds, no? And not on any other meteorological factors like yung sa rain. So for signal number 1, we can expect winds of 30 to about 60 kilometers an hour with a lead time of 36 hours as we progress with the wind signals. In other words, if the signals are increasing, the lead times also decrease correspondingly. Okay, and the impacts also are getting more widespread. So we go now to the third part of our lecture, which is the risk assessment. And I just want to showcase to you a software we call REDAS software. This is a software suite developed by CISCAN agencies, meaning these are government agencies that are mostly frontliners in disaster prevention and mitigation. And that includes PHIVOX, PAGASA, MGB, Mines and Geosciences Bureau, NAMRIA, and others. So this REDAS software is developed by CISCAN agencies led by PHIVOX, and it can be used on hazard monitoring, particularly the ETAM and SRM module for database development, especially for the SQLite and Spatialite components, and as an impact assessment tool, no, for SHA, SUSHIM, SWIFT, Float, and CropDat. And it's designed to simulate hazards and impacts of geological and various hydromet hazards in extreme weather events. Okay. Okay, so we focus our discussion on SWIFT. This is the interface for the SWIFT. Actually, the REDAS is a multi-awarded software. No? Perhaps some of you are familiar with it. And this REDAS actually is a regular program of the CISCAN agencies, particularly PHIVOX. They conduct regular trainings for the use of this, how to use the REDAS software. And even during the pandemic, we have these online classes for the REDAS training. Okay. And just to give you an idea of the risk calculation, perhaps you've encountered this one before. No? So for risk assessment, we have three components: the hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. For the hazards, those are the events that pose impacts in life, properties, and other elements. Those are the hydromet hazards like rain or floods or strong winds, or in case of geological hazards, we have the earthquake, tsunamis, and others. For the exposure, those are the elements that are subject to potential losses. When these are the things that we are on the lookout every time when there's a hazard. So for example, this is the population, this is the crops, these are the infrastructures. So those are the exposed elements, and they dictate the exposure of a certain community or area of concern or area of interest. While for the last one, it's a vulnerability or capacity, the inverse of vulnerability. It's the characteristic of those elements being exposed, whether they are weak or strong enough to resist the hazards. So those three are the ones dictating the risk. Okay, so we go now to the first one. Since we are with the REDAS SWIFT, we just focus on the wind, which is defined as air in motion. We have two types of wind, the regional and the local wind. The regional wind is the one aloft, that's 10 meters high. Now that regional wind is actually the one directly associated with our weather system, the prevailing weather system. If we want to study that, the effect of that wind, associated with the weather system, to the effect on the ground, then we compute for the local wind. That's how it is. Okay. And so for the regional wind, we have certain considerations or data. For the tropical cyclone, we have the track to locate the latitude and longitude of the tropical cyclone, and then of course the intensity of the TC, in terms of pressure and radius of maximum wind. Okay. We make use of various data sets, including the one coming from JMA, JTWC, of course, locally here in Pagasa. Okay. We have model outputs generating those regional winds, and this is how it is being plotted, especially with the use of REDAS. Okay, so that's the regional wind, the wind associated directly with, in this case, Typhoon Glenda. It's still not considering yet yung ground effects. Okay, so this is how it goes. To consider yung local wind, the wind that is being experienced on the ground, we multiply that regional wind directly associated with our weather system with the one that we call wind multipliers, to derive the local winds. And what are those wind multipliers? Of course, it's various factors. Once again, we have topography, terrain, and shielding. For the topography, normally when we go up on a higher elevation, the wind speeds increases. That's why when we are in Tagaytay or perhaps in Antipolo, we experience a windy condition. On the other hand, we have terrain and shielding. Terrain is actually more on the presence of high-rise trees and roughness coefficient on the ground. So the more high-rise trees present, roughness occurs, so the wind speed decreases. Same thing goes with shielding. Taller buildings reduces the wind speeds towards the other adjacent buildings. Okay? And then we also considered land cover processing, using IFSAR data and land cover data from NAMRIA to identify build-up areas, vegetation, and water bodies. And correspondingly, those land cover areas have different coefficients, as identified by this table from the Australian land cover classification. So we have also inputted that on the REDAS Swift. Okay, and we have derived this land cover area, especially for Metro Manila, and correspondingly for actually the cooler, the colors that are shaded with cool colors, yung areas na may cool area, itong mga areas with cool colors, yun po yung areas na medyo lesser yung coefficient. While for warmer areas with warm colors, yun po yung, that's the air, those are the areas that have higher coefficient. Okay. So we have also computed the terrain factor, shielding factor, topography, and so forth, combined all these. We have calculated it on all directions from north, east, west, south, and those in between. We crunched them all in a computer to come up with a combined multiplier that we can use for Metro Manila, and that's it. This is it. And for us to derive the local wind due to Typhoon Glenda, meaning these are the winds that are experienced on every point in Metro Manila. So we multiply the regional wind by Typhoon Glenda with the derived multiplier I've shown earlier. So that's the local wind, and there it is. Ito na po. So ito po yung ating, this is the wind now that we will use to compute for the risk. This is the wind that is going to be used in the exposure and evaluation of the vulnerability and fragility. Okay, so we go now to the exposure. This is where the data on the population and the buildings, in a certain area or locality is being used. Okay, so here it is. And then the vulnerability, especially talking here of the buildings, the vulnerability versus fragility. Fragility tells the physical damage and cost of damage to a building. So, for example, if we have this locality or a structure, in our case today is our museums, for example. So depending on the construction materials used in our museums, this tells the fragility of our structure, while the vulnerability tells the population or perhaps the staff or the community that is surrounding our museum, perhaps. So for the vulnerability, different building materials exhibit different vulnerability curves. So take, for example, we have this wind speed, and my house, for example, is made up of a bamboo. So there's the corresponding damage fraction, meaning when my house is built with bamboo, on this certain wind speed that is about 180 kilometers an hour, I can expect that I have a totally damaged house, okay, for bamboo. But for other materials, like for example, concrete hollow block, it's much lower because it has a different curve. So this is courtesy of the Institute of Civil Engineering from the UP Diliman. Okay, so they are also our partners in the development of this model. Okay, while for fragility, this is more of a probabilistic approach. The previous one is actually deterministic. This one is a probabilistic, meaning different materials exhibits 4 curves. So apat na curves for each materials known for construction. So for in this case, let's say, for example, we have a material X, and it has this fragility curves. So for this wind speed, I hope you can see it. I can expect the probability of damage of light, the slight damage is very high, compared to the complete shown in the black curve. While if I increase that wind speed, meaning if I slide that vertical line towards the right, then the curves are actually not anymore distinguishable from each other because it's already asymptotic on that point. Meaning it's more of a total damage already because of greater wind speed or something like that. So we have the hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and the risk. We can already compute for the risk with those information that we have in hand. Okay. So for the risk model, because of Typhoon Glenda, we are able to compute the following loss ratio and cost in millions of peso on different cities, LGUs within the Metro Manila area, including the greater Metro Manila area, the surrounding municipalities, provinces, and that's it. The greatest number of cost in terms of millions of peso goes with Quezon City, I think 710. So that's it. Okay, so this is the affected population. One thing good about REDAS and the SWIFT is that there's a visual representation of our output, so we can easily analyze or identify or visualize everything. So for the population affected, the ones that are more reddish are actually a greater number. And yeah, for the LGUs, I think the city of Manila is very much affected because of Typhoon Glenda. So that's it. This is the schematic diagram for the civil risk calculation. I won't go through it. Just for your appreciation, we have the hazard modeling component, and of course the exposure component. We input the vulnerability models and the cost per square meter. We now return with the risk as calculated Okay. So all in all, for the for our final words, what I've shown you earlier is a tool that can help us probably to study yung risk assessment. But as a whole, we have this disaster management that we also need to consider. And for it to become effective, we have several components that are necessary on this part. We have the technology and communication systems. Technology actually is the one for the early warning system. For example, for hydromet hazards, we have the state-of-the-art facilities, satellite, radars. For the communication systems, of course, we share it with our warning agencies, like here in PAGASA or in VBOX, to warn our public, and this is also shared with the media, Yung pong ating mga communication systems are in place also on those, for example, telemetered river basins to monitor floods, and every time there's an impending flooding, we, for example, sound the siren. So those are parts of the communication system. While for the blue ones, particularly local leaders, public and response protocols, for the local leaders, they must be trained in order to make the right decisions every time there's a scenario, or probably to decipher whether to do this or not. Public that is educated to react appropriately to warnings, ready to respond anytime, and of course the response protocols. This is very important. This actually dictates on what to do every time there's a hazard. That's why it's very important for us to exercise or to do regularly, every now and then, yung ating mga evacuation drills, for example, evacuation plans need to follow. All these elements must work well. They must work individually, independently, but in harmony. And failure in any one of these elements can mean failure of the whole system. So I think that's the most important one. So I think that's all. Thank you so much for your attention, and please do keep in touch with us every time you need something for our services, and we are ready to help you anytime you need. Thank you.